Another white supremacist and potential terrorist was thankfully stopped and arrested this week by the FBI before he was capable of carrying out an anti-Semitic mass shooting at a South Carolina synagogue. Law enforcement officials on Wednesday apprehended a 29-year-old man who bought a gun from an undercover FBI agent that he allegedly planned to use in an attack against the Temple Emanu-El Conservative Synagogue in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Agents arrested him after spotting him holding a bag in the parking lot of the Hampton Inn in Myrtle Beach. They found him in possession of a handgun and ammo sold to him by the agent, as well as a marijuana cigarette and a cell phone. According to the FBI, the suspect telegraphed his intentions to attack the synagogue during a series of anti-Semitic Facebook posts in which he expressed his desire to carry out a massacre against it in, quote, the spirit of Dylann Roof. In January, he told the undercover FBI agent that he wanted to attack a synagogue, but worried that he didn't have the proper training to handle it as efficiently as Roof did. And here are a couple of quotes directly from the guy who we're not identifying. "I got the heart to do that shit, but I don't have the good training. If I could do something on a fucking big scale and right on the fucking building or whatever, in the spirit of Dylann Roof, I seen what Dylann Roof did, and in my heart, I reckon I got a little bit of hatred, and I want to do that shit. Like, I got desire, not for nobody else, it just, I want something where I can say, I fucking did that, me personally." Thankfully, he was stopped.
So this goes to the heart of a couple of things that we've been talking about. One is, for a lot of these mass shooters and terrorists, it's about the glory.
Yeah, which is why we're not identifying him.
Yeah, whether it's a Muslim fundamentalist, it's a white supremacist, it's just a right-winger who kills cops, all of it is about taking credit, or just a mass shooter. Like the famous case of it, of course, is the Sandy Hook shooting, where the guy who did it had been collecting clippings of the other shooters. And he thought they were famous, and he wanted to be famous. And so this guy's saying, I just want the credit. I just want the credit. I want to be able to say, I did that. I did the hatred. I did the murders. And the second thing that it goes towards is, we said all the way back when Donald Trump started talking about, attacking Mexican immigrants and Muslims, and we said it's a slippery slope. And then once you start, and at the end, when you open up that Pandora's box, there's, right before you hit hope, which is at the bottom of Pandora's box, what you'll hit is anti-Semitism. Yeah. Because that's near the bottom of the barrel here in America. And once you, not because it's any worse than anti-Muslim or anti-Mexican or the racist stuff that they put forward. Nobody's better than anyone. We're all equal, and we should all protect each other equally. But once you've gotten there, which is so luckily forbidden in America, it's considered so outrageous, which is for good reason because of the history of what happened. Once you've gotten there, that means you've got no bounds. Yeah. And so now Trump is not the one who did this. So let's just be very clear about what we're saying. But for several days in a row now, he barely says the word anti-Semitism, and he certainly doesn't decry it. He says, I'm not an anti-Semite. Finally, he said the word anti-Semite, but he said, I am the least anti-Semitic person you'll ever meet, right? But he didn't say, oh, there's something wrong with anti-Semitism, we should fight back against that. He didn't say any of that. And he said instead, 2 days ago or yesterday, well, when asked about this question of anti-Semitism, well, I got a big electoral college victory, and there was tremendous enthusiasm for me. So that meaning, like, hey, people are enthusiastic about me, and I'm not going to try to take down their spirits. And so now here we are at the bottom of the barrel. Yeah. And so it bodes very poorly, not only for Jewish Americans, but for everyone, because that means there's no bounds left.
Yeah, obviously great job by the FBI. We've covered, there's two other things I want to talk about on this. One, we've covered multiple domestic terror attacks that have been stopped by the FBI, almost universally by white nationalists or white supremacists, whatever you want to call them, sovereign citizens. And thankfully, the FBI does a good job of shutting those down, and so they deserve a lot of credit for it. But this, we don't cover all of them because we can't, because there are too many. But this should be a reminder that when Trump shut down the Countering Violent Extremism program, or at least diverted it from worrying about all types of terrorism to just radical Islamic terrorism, and then they put out their list of extremist attacks that aren't covered enough by the media and left out all of the attacks by anyone who's white, any conservatives. These things go on. Thankfully, they're being stopped. And the the CVE, which helped to use social media and networks and things like that to try to stop these attacks before they happen, this was stopped because someone in the FBI noticed that he was looking for a gun and started communicating with him. If they're diverting resources away from that sort of investigation, this could have been stopped. Thankfully, Trump wasn't in charge long enough to take away the resources that allowed this attack to be stopped. But this could have very easily ended with multiple people dying at that particular synagogue in Myrtle Beach. And we know what the approach of the administration is. They don't want the FBI investigating this sort of terrorism. And so if in 6 months or if in a year or in 4 years, a terrible shooting happens, as has happened numerous times in American history at synagogues, it could have theoretically been stopped. We'll never know, but it could have theoretically been stopped if the approach was a bit different.
I mean, look, he took so long to denounce David Duke. And so David Duke, thankfully, was for a long time in the dustbin of history and a weird anti-Semitic kook. And you think, oh, well, Grand Wizard, the former Grand Wizard of the KKK, mainly racist. So sure, he's racist, but he was on this show, and I couldn't believe how obsessed he was with Jews. So like racism was like tiny percentage. Yeah. Everything was the Jews did this and the Jews did that. And then David Duke started to get more and more credibility. More people were covering him like he was a voice that needed to be listened to or debated with. And so now all of a sudden it's growing and growing. And it's not like this is the first time there's been anti-Semitic attacks or planned attacks. Of course, that's happened throughout American history. And recently there was the attack on the Jewish Community Center in Kansas. There was the attack on the Jewish Museum in Washington. And so this has been ongoing. So it's not like Trump invented this stuff or the era of Trump is the only time that it's ever happened. But what we got to do is make sure that it is not tacitly encouraged so that there is less of it, not more of it. Yeah. And the people who track this stuff are saying, there's more of it. So let's be really, really careful. And John is absolutely right about how we treat different kinds of terrorism. Look at what Trump chooses to focus on. If it's a Muslim terrorist attack, the Muslims, we've got to keep them out, right?
Even if it's an attempted stabbing where no one gets injured except for the person who tries to do the stabbing, that needs to be tweeted about, but not when a mosque is shot up.
Not when they are planning to attack a synagogue. Not when a mosque is shot up in Quebec. Doesn't mention it all those people. Can you imagine if a Muslim guy went into a church and massacred Christians at that church? Trump would still be talking about it. They'd be talking about it nonstop, and it's not just Trump. Fox News would not stop talking about it.
Unless, to be fair, it's a black church, because that already happened. We had that. That's what Dylann Roof did, is he shot up Christians. But because they're black Christians, they don't really care, because then you'd have to confront white terrorism, and that's not something they want to do.
And what do we mean by they don't care? What do they focus on? What do they say is an important issue? What do they direct policy towards? So what's the first thing Trump does? Oh, I got to ban people from Muslim majority countries, by the way, those 7 countries have done 0 fatal attacks in America. 0. But no, it's the Muslims. How about the white supremacists who are attacking Jews and Muslims and Sikhs, by the way, and all these other people? What are you going to do about them? Nothing. I won't even mention them.
Yeah. Well, we didn't even get to one of them. I'm not going to read all the graphics, but last week, a Georgia man was jailed after he went to the hospital because he got ricin on his hand that he was experimenting with. This is a guy whose Facebook information links him to the Georgia Church of Creativity, which is a group that champions what it considers the superior creativity of the white race.
Well, that was pretty creative to get ricin all over himself.
It is. So he's got pictures with a logo and the slogan, "Mobilize Nature's Finest." And the page is thick with memes supporting the Ku Klux Klan and the Aryan Brotherhood and mocking Jews and blacks. So he was experimenting with ricin, a toxic substance which has been used in multiple terrorist attacks around the world. Thankfully, the only person he's harmed so far is himself, because he's a jackass, and he is being jailed. But that's thankfully, another terrorist, white conservative, white nationalist, whatever term you want to use, who thankfully was stopped before he was able to commit a lethal terror attack.
So we're not saying that, hey, watch out for the white people, because we're not as stupid as they are. We're saying watch out for fundamentalists of any ilk who might commit violence. Let's be rational about how we do law enforcement so that we can protect everybody. instead of doing demagoguery that both doesn't protect us and actually does more harm and is counterproductive because it causes other people to want to do vigilante, in their mind, justice.
Yeah.
So now, to do justice to this story, the guy says that that nature leads to the right results. Well, that's the one thing I could agree with him on, because that was evolution at work right there. Let's put some watchers on the wall, investigative journalists to run down the Trump administration and the establishment. You can make that happen. tytnetwork.com/go.